Introduction. In the heart of ancient Greece, where myths and mortals collided, an extraordinary transformation unfolded. Athletes were not just competitors, but legends in the making. Imagine a time when the line between human potential and divine power seemed to blur. The Olympic Games weren't just about winning, they were about becoming immortalized in history with the favor of the gods. Picture this. The sun rises over Olympia, casting long shadows across the sacred grounds. The air buzzes with anticipation, and the earth trembles under the weight of thousands of footsteps, athletes, spectators, and priests preparing for the spectacle ahead. Every corner of the city hums with excitement. But the real magic is yet to begin. What did it take to become an Olympic champion back then? It was a mix of relentless training, a pinch of divine blessing, and an appetite for glory, and not just the bread and olives kind. The athletes honed their bodies and sharpened their minds in a world where victory wasn't just personal. It was sacred. The competitions were jaw-dropping displays of strength, speed, and strategy. But behind the glory, there were stories of incredible sacrifice, training routines that would make today's athletes reconsider their workout goals, and rivalries that burned hotter than the Greek sun. Defeat wasn't just painful, it was personal. Yet, rising from the ashes of failure was as revered as VD. Ready to dive deep into the sweat-soaked, sun-scorched, and sometimes divine journey of ancient Greek athletes? Let's uncover the training secrets, the rituals, and the fierce determination that turned mere mortals into living legends. History of the Olympics. The Olympic Games trace their roots back to the ancient city of Olympia, where, in 776 BC, the first recorded event took place. Back then, the Olympics weren't the global spectacle we know today. Instead, they began as a local religious festival in honor of Zeus, the king of the gods. Imagine this. Instead of plush stadiums and sponsorship deals, athletes raced barefoot on the hot, dusty ground while spectators cheered from grassy hillsides. The prize? Not a shiny gold medal, but a humble olive wreath, though in the eyes of the Greeks, it was the ultimate symbol of divine favor. The first Olympic event was simple, a foot race known as the Stade, a sprint about 200 meters long. But just like that one friend who insists on turning a casual game of charades into an intense showdown, the Greeks couldn't stop at a single race. Over the next few centuries, the Olympics evolved, growing into a massive 5-day event with everything from wrestling to chariot races. Talk about leveling up. By the 5th century BC, the Olympics were a much grander affair, featuring multiple disciplines such as boxing, the Pentathlon, a blend of 5 different sports, and equestrian events. Athletes from across the Greek city-states flocked to Olympia, not just for the glory, but because winning here meant more than just bragging rights. It was a way to make your entire city-state proud. Victory wasn't just personal. It was a patriotic duty, a point of honor that cities celebrated like a modern World Cup win. But the Olympics weren't just for fun and games. They also served as a unifying force in a Greece constantly torn apart by wars and rivalries. During the Games, an official truce known as the Chariot was declared. All conflicts, no matter how bitter, had to be paused, allowing athletes and spectators to travel safely to Olympia. Imagine that. Warriors putting down their swords to sprint for glory instead. In a way, the Olympics were ancient Greece's best shot at world peace. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. After nearly 12 centuries of competition, the ancient Olympics were banned in 393 AD by the Roman Emperor Theodosius I, who saw them as a pagan festival. It was a sad day for athletes and fans alike. Think of it as the ultimate game over. Yet the spirit of the Olympics didn't die. Fast forward more than 1,000 years, and the legacy of these ancient games would inspire the modern Olympic movement. Today, the world continues to celebrate these ideals of competition, unity, and athletic excellence, all of which can be traced back to that first dusty sprint across the fields of Olympia. Types of Olympic events. In the ancient Olympics, the diversity of events was a reflection of the Greeks' love for competition and their desire to showcase a wide range of athletic skills. And while modern athletes are busy with everything from synchronized swimming to snowboarding, ancient Greek athletes had their own share of tough, gritty competitions that would make today's Olympians break a sweat. Let's start with running. The oldest and most prestigious event was the stad race, a short sprint of about 200 meters. Then there was the diaulos, a double-length race, and for the truly endurance-minded, the dolichos, a long-distance run that could last up to 24 laps of the stadium. No wonder the crowd was so invested. Watching athletes push through lap after lap must have felt like the ancient version of a marathon binge watch. But running wasn't enough for the Greeks. They wanted more drama, more action. Enter wrestling. This wasn't your modern WWE entertainment. It was a brutal, no-holds-barred contest of strength. The goal was to throw your opponent to the ground 3 times. And while there were rules, no biting or eye gouging, thankfully, pretty much everything else was fair game. It wasn't uncommon for matches to go on for hours, with the wrestlers grappling in the dust while the audience cheered them on, probably sipping wine and feeling very grateful they weren't the ones in the arena. Boxing was another popular event. But if you think modern boxing is intense, the ancient version was on another level. Forget padded gloves. Competitors wrapped their fists in leather straps, sometimes embedding them with metal studs. Matches didn't end with a polite round of applause either. They went on until one fighter could no longer continue, which was often the result of a knockout, or as the Greeks like to call it, losing consciousness in a dramatic fashion. And let's not forget the pankration, a terrifying mix of boxing and wrestling with almost no rules. It was the ultimate test of an athlete's toughness. Basically, anything went except biting and gouging out your opponent's eyes. The Greeks had their limits. A combination of grappling, striking, and sheer endurance, pankration was the event that separated the heroes from the rest. If you thought MMA was intense, this was its ancient, more ferocious ancestor. One of the most prestigious contests was the Pentathlon, which tested athletes in 5 events: running, long jump, discus throw, javelin throw, and naturally, wrestling. The pentathlon wasn't just about who could run the fastest or throw the farthest. It was about versatility. A true Olympic champion needed to excel in multiple disciplines, balancing strength, speed, and skill in a way that left no doubt who was the best all-around athlete. And if you thought all this sounded hardcore, we haven't even gotten to the chariot racing yet. Picture this: 4 horses, 1 chariot, and a track filled with hairpin turns and high-speed collisions. These races were a combination of skill, daring, and sheer luck, and were as dangerous as they were thrilling. Crashes were common, and many drivers and horses didn't make it out unscathed. But for the winners, the reward was everlasting fame, not to mention the admiration of the entire Greek world. Each of these events wasn't just about athletic prowess, though. They were cultural celebrations that embodied the Greek ideals of arete, excellence, and kleos, glory. Winning an Olympic event wasn't just about beating your rivals. It was about achieving greatness, proving you were favored by the gods, and earning a place in the annals of history. Training of athletes. In ancient Greece, the path to Olympic glory wasn't paved with casual jogs or the occasional workout. Training for the Olympics was more akin to a full-time job, except without the weekends off and with a lot more olive oil massages. Yes, you read that right. Athletes would literally lather themselves in olive oil before and after training, believing it helped keep their muscles limber and their skin looking, well, pretty fabulous. The Greeks weren't just exercising for fun. They were sculpting their bodies into temples worthy of the gods themselves. Training took place in dedicated gymnasiums, and athletes would start preparing for the games years in advance. Young boys began their athletic training as early as age 7 or 8, under the guidance of professional coaches known as paidotribes. These trainers were like ancient personal fitness gurus, but instead of yelling at you to do more burpees, they were teaching ancient Greek wrestling techniques and the finer points of throwing a javelin straight. Training was intense and relentless. Athletes practiced in the gymnasium every day, honing their skills, building their strength, and developing the endurance needed to compete. Forget the modern notion of cross-training. Ancient athletes focused on their event with laser-like precision. If you were a boxer, you punched. If you were a discus thrower, well, you were probably really good at throwing heavy objects in a graceful arc. And their diet? Oh, it wasn't all Mediterranean bliss and hummus platters. Athletes ate high-protein diets heavy on meats, bread, cheese, fruits, and vegetables. Fresh figs and bread were common, and for some added performance, ancient athletes would consume a mysterious magic food known as honey. Ancient sports nutrition might not have included protein shakes or energy bars, but it was all about finding natural ways to boost stamina. If they had figured out quinoa, it would have been game over. Of course, no ancient Greek athlete would be considered serious without taking their discipline to spiritual levels. Athletes would often dedicate their training to the gods, especially Zeus, hoping divine favor would give them that extra edge. They weren't just running for themselves. They were running for glory and, as they believed, under the watchful eyes of the gods. The Greeks also understood the importance of balance in training. They believed in developing both the body and the mind, so athletes were expected to not only excel in physical contests, but also practice philosophy, debate, and music. Try asking your personal trainer to recite poetry while you're mid-sprint. This idea of the well-rounded individual was central to the Greek ethos. Strength was important, but so was wisdom and intellect. While modern athletes might focus on cutting-edge techniques and sports science, ancient Greek athletes focused on mastering the basics and repeating their skills until they were honed to perfection. Their regimen included everything from lifting heavy stones and running in full armor. Yes, they trained for war too, to perfecting their posture in the discus throw. This was peak performance training before fancy machines and Fitbit trackers were a thing. Imagine running drills without even an ancient pedometer. The concept of overtraining was also well understood by the Greeks, though perhaps not in the same terms we use today. Ancient athletes took regular breaks and incorporated plenty of rest into their routines, recognizing the importance of allowing their bodies to recover. After all, it was no use burning out before the big event, and the last thing anyone wanted was to pull a muscle and have to explain to Zeus why they couldn't compete. So, how did the athletes handle all this pressure? Simple. They embraced it. Competing in the Olympics wasn't just a physical challenge. It was a mental one. Only the strongest minds, along with the fittest bodies, could handle the intense focus and discipline required. But the rewards were worth it. Victory in Olympia meant immortal fame, statues, poems, and the adoration of all Greece. Talk about motivation. From olive oil massages to mental training, the ancient Greeks understood that greatness didn't just happen, it was earned, and every drop of sweat was a step closer to glory. Stages and infrastructure. The grandeur of the ancient Olympic Games wasn't just in the athletes, it was in the very ground they walked on, and oh boy, did the Greeks know how to build a stage for greatness. Welcome to Olympia, a sprawling complex that was the epicenter of athletic achievement and religious devotion. This wasn't your average sports venue. Olympia was a blend of competition, spirituality, and some very well-organized chaos. At the heart of it all stood the Stadium of Olympia, where the action took place. This wasn't your modern-day stadium with cushy seats, snacks, and halftime shows. No, the Olympic Stadium was built to accommodate thousands of spectators, but it was as basic as it gets. Long stone benches, a sandy running track, and the ever-present dust cloud that rose as athletes competed. Spectators sat on sloped embankments, often exposed to the sun, but no one seemed to mind. After all, they were witnessing history, and who cares about shade when you're watching a race that could define a champion? The stadium's design itself was simple but effective. The track, known as the Stadion, was about 600 feet long, roughly the length of a modern football field, where the original foot race, the Stade, was run. For the athletes, the stadium was where the culmination of years of training would finally be tested, and for the spectators, it was where dreams were either made or crushed, depending on who crossed the finish line first. But Olympia was more than just a place to run and wrestle. The entire complex included a host of other important buildings, each serving its purpose in the grand spectacle of the games. First up, we have the gymnasium, not just your typical workout space with treadmills and dumbbells. This was where athletes practiced before the competitions. The gymnasium was a large open-air facility where the athletes trained in events like wrestling, boxing, and running. Next to it was the Palestra, a training ground specifically for wrestlers and boxers, complete with sand pits to soften the inevitable falls and takedowns. But perhaps the most famous structure at Olympia was the Temple of Zeus, a massive temple dedicated to the king of the gods. Inside it stood a giant statue of Zeus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Measuring about 40 feet tall, the statue was made of ivory and gold, and it was believed to represent the very power of the gods themselves. Athletes would often pray here before competing, seeking divine favor, because when you're about to get pummeled in a wrestling match, it doesn't hurt to have Zeus on your side. Around the temple was the Altis, the sacred grove where various religious rituals took place, including the lighting of the sacred Olympic flame. The flame was kindled by focusing the rays of the sun with a mirror. Yes, the ancient Greeks basically invented solar power. This flame symbolized purity and the link between humans and the divine, and it was kept burning throughout the games. It's pretty much the ancient version of the torch relay we have today, only without the paparazzi. As for the athletes, their accommodation wasn't as glamorous as today's Olympic Village, but they were well looked after. Temporary housing was set up in the form of large tents or simple lodgings, where athletes and their trainers would stay for the duration of the games. The bustling atmosphere around Olympia was electric, with athletes from different city-states mingling, sharing stories, and possibly a few sneaky tips, and preparing for the biggest event of their lives. Spectators from all over Greece, and even beyond, would flock to Olympia, turning the whole region into a vibrant, pulsating hub of activity. Inns, taverns, and makeshift markets would pop up around the site, creating a festival-like atmosphere. You could almost hear the haggling over prices for wine, bread, and souvenirs. But remember, this wasn't just a sporting event. It was a religious festival too, which meant prayers, sacrifices, and plenty of opportunities to pay your respects to the gods. With such a massive influx of people, the logistics of organizing the games were, to say the least, impressive. The ancient Greeks had systems in place to ensure everything ran smoothly. Events were timed meticulously, probably by sundial because, hey, this was ancient Greece, and the competitions were spaced out over several days to accommodate the sheer number of athletes and disciplines. And let's not forget the judges, or Hellenodikai, who were responsible for overseeing the games and ensuring fairness. These judges trained for months to be worthy of their role, because in ancient Greece, fairness if you cheated, you didn't just face public humiliation, you risked offending the gods, which is a bit worse than getting booed by the crowd. In fact, if you were caught cheating, a statue of Zeus, called Azanes, would be erected with your name inscribed on it as a permanent reminder of your disgrace. Ouch! In short, the infrastructure at Olympia wasn't just about functionality. It was about creating an environment that celebrated human achievement, honored the gods, and made sure everyone knew just how important these games were. The ancient Greeks knew how to build something that was more than just a venue. It was a place of legends, rituals, and ceremonies. When we think of the Olympics today, we envision grand opening ceremonies, flag-waving athletes, and lighting the torch with all the fire away. But back in ancient Greece, the rituals surrounding the Olympic Games were a little different. Think less fireworks and more fire sacrifices, and you're closer to the vibe of Olympia's sacred ceremonies. The ancient Olympics were not just about sport, they were deeply entwined with religion. In fact, the Games were initially a religious festival held to honor Zeus, the king of the Greek gods. Every athlete, spectator, and official knew that they were treading on sacred ground. The entire spectacle was as much about pleasing the gods as it was about competing for glory. The first and perhaps most important ritual was the sacrifice to Zeus, which kicked off the Games. Before a single race was run or a wrestling match grappled, hundreds of cattle were led up to the altar of Zeus, a massive altar made of the ash from previous sacrifices, and offered to the god. This wasn't a small backyard barbecue either. This was a serious, community-wide event. The smoke from the sacrificial fire would rise high, carrying the prayers of athletes and citizens to the heavens. Only after Zeus was properly honored could the Games begin. And don't worry, after the sacrifices, everyone enjoyed a huge feast with the remaining meat. Yes, even back then, people loved a good post-sport BBQ. One of the most iconic rituals was the lighting of the Olympic flame, which took place in the Altis, the sacred grove of Olympia. Priests and priestesses would use a concave mirror to focus the sun's rays onto kindling, creating the fire that symbolized the purity of the Games. This fire was then carried to the altar and kept burning for the duration of the Games. The flame wasn't just about keeping warm at night, it symbolized a connection between the gods and the athletes, with the sun itself lighting the way for the competitors. It was a moment of reverence and anticipation, and that fire, once lit, seemed to spark the beginning of something much larger than just a set of races. Then there were the oaths. Before the athletes even stepped onto the field, they gathered in front of the temple of Zeus to swear a solemn oath, promising to compete fairly, respect the rules, and avoid cheating. With their hands over a slice of sacred boar's meat, because who doesn't like a dramatic oath with some pork, they would swear to abide by the rules of the Games. Breaking this oath wasn't just a matter of getting disqualified, it was a dishonor to the gods. And as we know, messing with Zeus was not something you wanted on your Olympic record. But the rituals didn't end once the competitions started. Throughout the Games, additional sacrifices were made to other gods and heroes, including Pelops, a mythological figure, and the hero associated with Olympia. The athletes and spectators participated in numerous religious ceremonies, each one reinforcing the idea that these Games were as much about the divine as they were about human excellence. As for the victors, their moment of glory was steeped in ritual as well. The closing ceremony was perhaps the most anticipated part of the Games, where the winners were crowned with olive wreaths made from branches of a sacred olive tree near the temple of Zeus. These weren't your typical floral crowns. The olive wreath symbolized not just victory, but divine approval. The victors were seen as chosen by the gods, and their achievement was a reflection of divine favor. No gold medals, no endorsement deals, just pure, God-blessed prestige. And honestly, what's a Nike contract compared to Zeus's approval? Once crowned, the victors were paraded through Olympia, cheered on by the crowds, and offered front-row seats to the next Games. But their rewards didn't stop there. When they returned to their home city-states, they were often treated as heroes. Some cities even tore down part of their city walls to symbolize that they didn't need defenses. They had an Olympic champion. The closing of the Games was also marked by sacrifices and feasts, with more tributes to the gods and celebrations that probably made the post-victory press conferences we see today seem a little dull in comparison. The entire community would join in, from the athletes to the spectators, in a grand celebration of human achievement and divine favor. But even with all this glory and ceremony, there was always a reminder of the fragility of human effort. those who cheated faced not only earthly punishment, but divine retribution. Statues called Zanes were erected near the entrance to the stadium, paid for by fines collected from cheaters. Each statue bore the name of a disgraced athlete, serving as a permanent reminder of what happens when you try to pull a fast one in front of the gods. So yes, while everyone came for the glory, they stayed for the honor, or at least tried to. In summary, the rituals and ceremonies surrounding the ancient Olympics were much more than just a backdrop to the sporting events. They were integral to the entire experience. From sacrifices and oaths to the crowning of victors with olive wreaths, these rituals connected the athletes to the gods and to the cultural and religious values of their time. The games were not just a competition, but a sacred event that elevated both the body and the spirit. Now, how about we delve into what it was really like to live as an ancient Olympic athlete? Get ready for some grueling training routines, strict diets, and perhaps a few surprising perks.
By my side, intense, strong, no fear to face, nowhere to hide, intense. I subscribe to this channel, click like today, because content like this just lights my way. Intense and slow.